Let's bring in Rodney Scott. He served as Border Patrol Chief under President Trump and later President Biden. In 2021, he says he was essentially forced out of his position by the Biden administration. Chief, good to have you with us on this interesting day when we watch two of your bosses, the former President Trump and the current president, I should say, Joe Biden, visit the border. What do you make of the locations that they are going to be in today, Brownsville and El Paso?
Thank you for having me on, Martha. I think it is very telling. Once again, Joe Biden, it's a photo op, so they don't want big groups of illegal aliens in the background. They wanted to go to someplace slower, but there's an unseen aspect as well. Brownsville is where most of the non-governmental organizations that provide shelter and services to illegal aliens after they cross, that's their home base, if you will. So he'll get to talk to them. And you notice there's nobody from Texas really there. So President Trump is meeting with the governor of Texas. I think he's going to hear what does and doesn't work with Operation Lone Star, what the states had to put into this. And it's telling that the Biden administration is trying to, tear down and the border infrastructure that's being put up in Texas, which mirrors a lot of what U.S. Border Patrol was doing under multiple prior administrations, not just the Trump administration. It's really it's funny. These are polar opposites of border security concepts and ideas.
I wonder when President Biden is speaking to these non-governmental organizations there, if they will talk to him about the problem of human trafficking at the border and the fact that children come across with a phone number and American taxpayer dollars are essentially used through Border Patrol to hand them off to people, and they have no idea whether or not these people are human traffickers or members of their families. Can you elaborate on that? And do you think they will talk to him about that? Will they want to take that opportunity to tell him about it?
Absolutely not. And here's the reason. It doesn't benefit either one of the political talking points. One of the problems with the Senate bill that no one's talking about is it had $1.4 billion more for those NGOs, and it did not do anything to attack child trafficking. It didn't do anything to fix the Flores Agreement that mandates the government release juveniles into the U.S. as quickly as possible. Those are things that needed to be addressed. Unfortunately, my time in the Biden administration, we weren't allowed to talk about anything like that. The entire focus was on expediting processing and avoiding any negative optics of people backing up on the border. Get as many people in as you can. Every prior administration, to include obviously the Trump administration, was focused on deterring illegal activity, preventing the crime in advance, and therefore protecting those children. They won't talk about that in Brownsville today.
I heard Jackie say earlier, this is a photo op for President Biden, and it really is sad that any president shouldn't want to hear the brutal truth of everything that's going on, to really take advantage of this moment. Obviously, it's a very important electoral issue for him, and the more he understands and actually sees, the better. I want to go back, actually. This is a throwback to Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton in 1995 in his State of the Union address. I want to play this and get your reaction from where we were then and where this Democrat president is now. Watch.
We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
Rodney, what a fascinating, stark contrast between these two Democratic presidents.
It's unbelievable. And I'll just remind all your viewers, the chief of the Border Patrol sits 2 blocks away from the White House. Anytime that President Biden really wanted to know what was going on, he could just call that chief over and get a briefing. This administration does not do that. Under the Trump administration, visits to the White House were routine. And I can tell you, even back under the Clinton administration, I was a young agent, but I briefed Janet Reno in Imperial Beach, California, and explained to her what was going on the border. They asked for our advice. They took our advice. They took actions. This administration has walled off all the experts, and they're doing their own thing, and it's all about letting more people in. not secure the border, unfortunately.
It's so interesting, Jake. Chief Owens, the current chief who took over after you. All right. Okay, I just want to show everybody, President Biden is on camera right now. He is being shown some things by Chief Owens. And you make a great point, Chief Scott, excuse me, that anytime any president wants to speak to the chief of the Border Patrol, he can just go a few blocks away and say, look, how many drug traffickers are we letting in? How many human traffickers are we letting in? How do we get our arms around this fentanyl issue? Tell me what your folks tell you. But, you know, unfortunately, Chief Owens has to resort to tweeting pictures of gang members and showing the different gang tattoos that they're wearing on an almost daily basis to get his message out. What do you say as you look at this image here?
Yeah, it's actually quite telling. And again, you're seeing Chief Owens and then the sector chief, Chief Chavez there. But it's for the cameras. The reason, and I hate to get political, but I believe the reason that the Biden administration is down there is if he got that briefing in the White House, there'd be no cameras. There'd be no show, right? But they know what it takes to secure the border. We handed them the most secure border in the history of the United States and a roadmap to keep it that way and make it even better. Through 94 executive actions, President Biden completely destroyed border security. And contrary to popular dialogue, he could reestablish a significant part of that by just, with the stroke of a pen, putting those measures back in place. I hope he listens to the men and women down there. I hope they're free to speak openly. But I can tell you from my experience in the Biden administration, that was not the norm. If they speak freely, they'll probably be out of a job.
Is that what happened to you?
That is exactly what happened to me. I was followed orders to a certain extent, but I gave feedback and I told them where I thought things were going to go wrong, and they did not listen to any of the advice we gave them whatsoever. So I was reassigned, and I chose to retire and speak out instead.
Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Chief, is on this trip as well today. And he said, I believe earlier today, that the gains that have been made, if you can call it that, or the slight drops that we've seen in numbers of people crossing in certain areas is thanks to the Mexican government. Is that who you would think in this situation? He did not mention Governor Abbott and the controversy that has happened between the governor and the White House over the governor's efforts to just do whatever he can to block people from getting into his state.
Yeah, so typical of Secretary Mayorkas, there's partial truths, but it leaves out the bigger picture. So you need to look at the entire southwest border. The vast majority of illegal immigration has now shifted to Southern California, which is a sanctuary state, and into Arizona, where they have a governor that's been tearing down some of the infrastructure that prior governors put in place. Texas, the numbers have dropped dramatically. Now, overall, the numbers have dropped somewhat. And yes, when Mexico enforces their own laws, then we actually see less criminality at the border and less illegal entries. If you go back about a month or so, Pompeo, I believe Blinken went down to Mexico and actually asked them to help out a little bit. Mexico's been very open. They would much rather have Biden be the president than Trump. So they're going to step up some of their enforcement currently. But we should not be exporting our national security. Border Patrol should be empowered to arrest people crossing the border, and we should hold them in custody or outside the country until their case is adjudicated. It's common sense. Right now, we're relying on another country to slow down the flow. But guess what else that means? They get to pick and choose. Sorry, that allows Mexico and the cartels to pick and choose who enters this country instead of the president that you see on that screen right now.
We have hundreds of thousands of people who have come into the country who are known gotaways, who were counted by Border Patrol officials who, saw them get away. And then, I don't know, I mean, what's your best guess at how many people are in this country who got away who we don't know about?
Yeah, so the unknown is huge, but I do want to focus on what you just said. So I believe Chief Owens just tweeted out they've documented over 120,000 gotaways just this fiscal year. But that means there's been over 1.8, almost 1.9 million under the Biden administration. But it takes Border Patrol agents being out in the field, manning cameras, manning sensors, looking at footprints to document those known gotaways. And unfortunately, the numbers crossing right now, the vast majority of agents are stuck inside processing. South Texas specifically and much of New Mexico don't have a lot of technology to document those crossings. So the unknowns are off the chart. Like there's no way I could estimate that for you, but it's clearly in the millions.
It's incredible. We're just watching the president as he speaks to some of these border officials. We saw a few moments ago, former President Trump was addressing some border officials as well. Got some big smiles from them as he landed in El Paso, and we're going to be hearing from him very shortly as well. But let me ask you this, Chief. You know, the legislation that they tried to pass on Capitol Hill, the Border Patrol Council came out and basically supported it. The Union Border Patrol side, they supported that legislation, and it was shot down. Did you support it, and would it have made Americans safer if it had passed?
No, I did not support that bill. And let's be clear about the legislation, because there were two pieces of legislation, and the first one is not being talked about very much. The House passed H.R. 2, right, which was a good border security bill. It went to the Senate. They refused to act on it. The bill we're talking about now out of the Senate, it had some good provisions in it, changing some of the asylum processes. But unfortunately, it normalized a level of criminality that's unfathomable. Also, for their provision for the emergency authority, if you will, the numbers were way too high. It gave you the feeling that you could close down the border, but without the capability. It also mandated that U.S. Customs and Border Protection accept 1,400 illegal aliens a day through ports of entry. That baseline's at 500,000 a year. That bill was full of all kinds of issues and problems. I did not support it. I can't speak to why the Border Patrol did. A Border Patrol union, not the Border Patrol. Yeah, other than the fact that they are looking for any relief they can possibly find right now, and they might not have been looking at the other provisions.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think that just the increase in money for more Border Patrol would be attractive to the Border Patrol Union, because their folks are under so much stress at this border. And as you point out, they can't really do the job that they were hired to do. They're busy processing. But one of the conflicts there is that it appears that this administration wants to hire more Border Patrol so that they can get people into the country and processed more quickly. Is that accurate?
That is 100% accurate. That's consistent with every conversation I had with the Biden administration while I was still working for them. And that's the problem with throwing more money at this. The problem is catch and release. As long as we're releasing people into the United States immediately after they've been arrested by the Border Patrol, this flow is going to exceed Border Patrol's capabilities to actually do interviews, to vet people, figure out who they are and why they're coming here. And we're going to have more cases like the Lincoln Riley, and we don't want that, right? The border security is supposed to be vetting people, making sure we know who's coming into the country. Just throwing more agents and money at it won't work. This was created by executive action, this crisis. It could be fixed by executive action.
You know, I watched another piece of video. We showed that video of former President Clinton a little while ago. And I should mention we're about to see former President Trump in just a moment here. I can tell that there's a lot of cameras moving around on the shot where he is. So we'll get you that in just a moment. But, you know, I listened to what President Obama said in an address from the White House. And he talked about the need to return people immediately who are crossing into the country. How did this narrative get so far away from that? And answer that, if you would, sir, while we watch this shot of former President Trump arriving in Eagle Pass.
Sure. And honestly, I think people's compassion just got hijacked, and this administration got influenced by this extreme left. I spent a lot of my time in California early on in my career having conversations with both Democrats and Republicans, and border security was not controversial. Immigration policy, which is separate, that gets a lot of debates, but border security is just about knowing who and what enters your home, our national country, or our national home. This administration just kind of went completely off script, surprised even myself about how just dedicated they were to an open border.
Rodney Scott, former U.S. Border Patrol Chief, thank you very much. If you stay with us while we watch this, we would appreciate it.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.